My sister gave birth and my parents left me dying in the hospital. 3 years later, the family discovered the truth, and now my parents are exposed as the monsters they are. I'm 24 years old. I study engineering at university. I've been training mixed martial arts since I can remember. And I need to get this story off my chest, because what happened 3 years ago basically destroyed any relationship I could have with my parents and my sister. Honestly, I never thought we'd get to this point, but I guess when your parents literally abandon you in a hospital after an accident that almost killed you, there's not much left to salvage, you know? I should start at the beginning, when my sister Rachel got pregnant like 4 years ago. I was super excited. Seriously, I was going to be an aunt for the first time, and Rachel and I had always been close, or so I thought. She's 4 years younger than me, so when this happened, I was 21 and she was 17, and my parents, David and Linda, were between excited and worried, because obviously she was young to have a baby, but they decided to support her completely. Me too, obviously. Like I offered to help with whatever I needed. I went with her to some medical appointments. We bought stuff for the baby together. It was nice. The day everything went to hell was a Tuesday in November. I think it was like 6 in the evening. I don't know. It was already getting dark. I was in my apartment near campus, finishing a project for a class, when Rachel called me super excited, saying her water had broken, and she was heading to the hospital. My parents were already with her, she told me. But I wanted to be there too, you know, to support her and because I wanted to see my niece be born. So I grabbed my keys, got in my car, a 2015 Honda Civic I'd bought used the year before, and headed to the hospital, which was like 40 minutes from where I lived. Everything was fine. I was driving normally, listening to music, thinking about what I'd say to Rachel when I got there, if I found her really nervous or scared. And the hospital was in the city where my parents lived. I had moved to study, but it wasn't that far. The thing is, I was on a main avenue, like one of those with several lanes, when out of nowhere a truck ran a red light at full speed and crashed into me on the driver's side. I didn't even see it coming. Seriously, 1 second I was thinking about my niece and the next everything was metal, twisting and glass everywhere and a pain I can't even describe. I don't remember much about the minutes immediately after the impact. Apparently, I was unconscious for a while, and when I woke up, I was trapped in the car. I couldn't move. It felt like my whole body was on fire. I could hear sirens in the distance and people shouting, and all I could think was that I couldn't breathe right and that I was going to die there. The paramedics arrived and had to use I don't know what tools to get me out of the car because it was completely destroyed. They took me to the nearest hospital, which curiously wasn't the same one where Rachel was giving birth, and that's when the worst part started. Emergency services contacted. My parents, obviously, because I was carrying my ID and my phone, which miraculously survived the accident. They explained that I'd had a serious accident, that I was in emergency surgery because I had multiple fractures, internal bleeding, a bunch of things. And my parents, David and Linda, literally told the paramedics they couldn't come because their other daughter was giving birth and to please not call them again unless it was absolutely critical. Can you believe it? They were told their daughter had been in a near-fatal accident, and they basically responded with, "We're busy, don't bother us." I was in the hospital for 3 weeks. The first 2 were the worst because I had to go through 2 more surgeries after the first one. One to fix my hip, which was shattered, and another because apparently I had internal injuries they didn't detect at first. My friends from university were the ones who were with me the whole time. Sarah, Marcus, and like 5 others took turns visiting me, brought me things, stayed with me when I couldn't sleep because of the pain, helped me with basic things like eating because I literally couldn't move my arms well. They were my family during those weeks. And afterwards, too. Honestly, my parents didn't show up. Not once during those first 2 weeks. Nothing. Not a call. Not a message. Absolutely nothing. I was there, destroyed physically and emotionally, wondering if I was going to be able to walk normally again. The doctors weren't sure at first. If I was going to be able to finish college. If my life was basically ruined, and my parents were at their house with Rachel and the baby, as if I didn't exist, they finally called me, like after a week. A whole week after the accident. My mom was the one who called, and instead of asking how I was or apologizing for not coming, the first thing she said to me was something like, "Olivia, what were you thinking? How could you drive at night when you knew Rachel was giving birth?" And I was like, "What? Are you blaming me?" And she kept saying it had been super irresponsible of me, that I should have stayed home, that now they had to worry about me on top of taking care of Rachel and Maya, That's what they named my niece. And that I had basically ruined that special moment for them. I started crying, obviously, and I told her it had been a drunk driver who hit me, that I hadn't done anything wrong, that I just wanted to be there for my sister. And my mom kind of calmed down but still had that attitude like, well, but it was still a bad idea. My dad didn't even get on the phone. After that call, I cried for like 3 hours straight until Sarah arrived and stayed with me all night. What finally broke me was when I got out of the hospital. The medical bills were astronomical, like we're talking about more than $200,000, because in the United States, healthcare is a business, and emergency surgeries cost a fortune. I had student insurance, but it didn't cover even half. And when I asked my parents for help, because technically I was still their dependent for tax purposes and stuff, they told me they didn't have that money, that they were spending everything on things for Maya, and that I should have been more careful. My friends did a fundraiser. Seriously, they all pooled together the money that was missing. Sarah has some uncles with money who put in a large part. Marcus worked double shifts for months to help. Other friends organized fundraising events on campus. Between all of them, they paid my medical debts, while my own parents said it wasn't their responsibility because I had decided to drive that night. As if having an accident caused by a drunk driver was my fault. You know what I mean? Recovery was horrible. I had to do physical therapy for months. I couldn't go back to university that semester. I lost my part-time job I had at a cafe near campus because physically I couldn't stand for that long. Mixed martial arts, which had literally been my life since I was 12. I had to completely quit for almost a year because my body simply couldn't. And there were nights when the pain was so intense I couldn't sleep, and I'd stay awake wondering why my parents hated me so much as to abandon me like that. They tried to invite me to the house a couple of times during those first months. Once for Christmas, like 3 weeks after I got out of the hospital, and another for Maya's baptism in February. I told them no both times. I didn't explain why. I simply said I couldn't go. And I think at that point they started to realize things weren't okay between us, but none of them really made the effort to fix the situation. Like, my mom would send me messages occasionally, asking how I was, but they were generic messages. Never a real apology or acknowledgement of what they'd done to me. Like 6 months passed and I decided to cut off contact completely. I blocked them from my phone, from social media, from email, everything. I told the few relatives I was in contact with, a couple of cousins, my paternal grandmother, that I didn't want to know anything about David, Linda, or Rachel, and that if they wanted to maintain contact with me, they had to respect that. Most of them understood, although they didn't know exactly what had happened because I didn't tell them all the details. I just said I'd had problems with my parents and needed space, you know. I tried not to drag them into the drama. During those 3 years I was without contact with them. I completely rebuilt my life. I went back to university, finished my degree a year later than planned, but I finished it and with good grades. I went back to training martial arts, although my body never went back to being exactly the same. There are things I can't do like before, certain movements that cause me pain. I got a decent job at a tech company, moved to a better apartment, basically moved on without them. My friends continued being my real family. Like I spent Christmas with Sarah and her family, Thanksgiving with Marcus and his siblings. I felt more part of those families than my own. Everything was relatively stable until like 2 months ago. Turns out my parents organized a big family dinner to celebrate that Rachel had gotten a promotion at her work. She works in sales or marketing, something like that. And apparently during that dinner, my Aunt Caroline, who's my mom's younger sister, and who I had a close relationship with before the accident, asked about me. Specifically, she asked why I wasn't there and if I was still angry about that thing without specifying what that thing was because she didn't know the full story either. And here's the good part. My parents, instead of admitting what really happened, told all the relatives present. We're talking about like 15 people, uncles, cousins, grandma, a completely distorted version of events. According to them, I'd had a small accident where I'd barely gotten hurt and baddy-do. That when they had gone to the hospital to visit me, I'd gotten hysterical, yelled at them, told them I hated them and never wanted to see them again. They said they'd tried to contact me multiple times for years, but that I rejected them, and that basically I was the bad guy in the story, the ungrateful daughter who had abandoned her family out of pride. My Aunt Caroline didn't quite believe it, apparently, because she's known me since I was born and knows I'm not like that. So she looked for my number, which I'd changed, but she has her connections, and called me like a week after that dinner. At first, I didn't want to talk to her. Seriously. Because I thought she was coming to lecture me or convince me to forgive my family, or one of those typical phrases. But she told me, "Look, Olivia, I just want to hear your version because what your parents said doesn't make sense, and I need to know the truth." I told her everything. Absolutely everything. The accident. The weeks in, the hospital alone, the call where they blamed me, the medical debts my friends paid, the horrible recovery, everything. I explained that my parents literally told emergency services not to bother them, that they didn't show up even once in 3 weeks, that they treated me like I'd ruined Rachel's life on purpose. Caroline was silent for what seemed like hours when I finished talking, and then all she said was, "Oh my God, Olivia, I'm so sorry." I had no idea. Apparently, Caroline believed my parents at first because, well, they're her siblings or in-laws. Why would they lie about something like that? But after talking to me, she realized that the story they told had a ton of holes. Like, if they'd really visited me at the hospital, why didn't any of my friends know them? If they'd really tried to contact me for years, why didn't they have any proof of that? No saved messages or anything. And the part about the small accident where I barely got hurt was obviously a lie because I'd been in the hospital for weeks and had permanent scars from the surgeries. Caroline did what I never expected her to do. She told the truth to the whole family. Not in a dramatic way or anything, but rather like mentioning it casually in conversations. Like, you know, I talked to Olivia and she told me what really happened with the accident, and then she'd explain the real facts. The news spread fast because our family, although it's not huge, is super gossipy, so within 2 weeks, literally everyone knew the truth. The uncles and cousins started distancing themselves from my parents. Not obviously at first, but they did stop responding to messages as quickly, started making excuses not to go to family gatherings, that kind of thing. The straw that broke the camel's back was when Rachel sent out invitations for Maya's 3rd birthday, which was going to be a big party at a rented hall with clowns and the whole thing. And literally, no one RSVP'd. Not a single relative accepted to go. 3 weeks ago exactly. On a Saturday morning, I was in my apartment watching a series on Netflix when someone knocked on the door. I opened without thinking. My mistake. I know. And there were David and Linda, my parents, standing at my door after 3 years of not seeing each other. My first reaction was to try to close the door, but my dad put his foot to block it and my mom started talking super fast, saying they needed to talk to me urgently. I told them to leave, that they had nothing to talk to me about, but they insisted and basically entered my apartment without invitation. My mom was crying, which surprised me because she never cries. And my dad had that desperate look. I'd only seen a couple of times in my life. They told me that the whole family had canceled for Maya's birthday, that my Aunt Caroline had been spreading lies about what happened 3 years ago, and that I needed to call everyone and explain to them that it had all been a misunderstanding. I was like, what? First, Caroline didn't spread lies. She told the truth that you hid. Second, did you really come here after 3 years not to apologize but to ask me to help you save a birthday party? Is that what matters to you? My mom started with how Maya was innocent in all this, that she was just a child who didn't deserve to have her birthday ruined by adult problems, and that I was being selfish by not thinking about my niece. That's when I exploded. I can't lie. I yelled at them everything I'd been holding in for 3 years. I told them they had abandoned me when I needed them most, that they had chosen Rachel and Maya over me without thinking twice, that they had left me alone in a hospital recovering from an accident that almost killed me, that my friends had had to pay my medical debts because you didn't want to, that they had blamed me for something that wasn't my fault. My dad tried to interrupt me, but I kept going. I told him I'd spent 3 years rebuilding my life without them and that now they showed up only because the family found out the truth and was judging them, not because they actually cared about me. My mom tried to touch my arm and I pulled back. I told them to get out of my apartment immediately, or I'd call the police. My dad said something like, "Don't be dramatic, Olivia. We can resolve this like adults." And that's what made me lose control completely. I shoved them. I literally shoved them towards the door, and here's where my martial arts training kind of works against me, because even though I haven't been training as intensely for a year, I know how to use my strength. And while I was physically getting them out of my apartment, I yelled at them that I wish they could feel even a little bit of what I felt. I wish their children would abandon them when they needed them most. I wish they'd experienced that pain. I closed the door with the lock and stood there shaking, feeling like garbage, because despite everything, I'd been violent with them. I'd pushed them. I sat on the floor of the entrance and cried for hours, like that ugly crying where you can't breathe right and your whole body hurts. I called Sarah and she came immediately. Stayed with me all night while I processed what had happened. 2 days later, I received a message from Rachel, the first in 3 years, telling me that if I didn't apologize to our parents for physically assaulting them, and if I didn't fix the situation with the family, she was going to press charges against me for assault. She threatened me, basically, with getting me in legal trouble if I didn't do what they wanted. She didn't even ask how I was, didn't mention the accident, nothing, just the threat, and a bunch of accusations that I was a horrible sister and that I was being cruel to Maya. I talked to a lawyer because I got scared, honestly, even though I knew that technically I had pushed them, so maybe they had a case. The lawyer told me that yes, technically they could press charges, but it would be difficult for it to succeed given the context, especially because they had entered my property without invitation and because there was a long history of family conflict. He advised me not to respond to Rachel's message, not to have more contact with them, and that if they filed formal charges, he would represent me. But the thing that bothered me most about that whole exchange was realizing that Rachel genuinely believed I was the bad guy here. She really thought I'd been the dramatic one, the one who had cut off contact for no reason, the one who was ruining everything out of pride. And that hurt me more than anything my parents had done, because Rachel was my younger sister, the person who was supposed to know me better than anyone, and she had believed our parents' version, without questioning it even once. Maya's birthday was 2 weeks ago. According to what Caroline told me afterwards, it was a disaster. No one from the family went. Literally, no one. Only Rachel's boyfriend, the father of Maya. They never married, but they're still together. And his parents went, a couple of Rachel's work friends, and obviously my parents. The hall they'd rented was practically empty. There was food and decorations for like 50 people and only like 10 showed up. Maya apparently asked why her cousins and uncles hadn't come, and Rachel didn't know how to answer her. Part of me felt bad for Maya. Seriously. Because she's an innocent child who has nothing to do with all this adult drama. But another part of me thought, well, maybe this will teach my parents that actions have consequences. You can't lie to your whole family for years and expect everything to be fine when the truth comes out. Caroline called me that same night of the birthday. She was in her car. She'd gone to the party just to drop off Maya's gift and had left immediately because she didn't want to be there with my parents. She told me she'd talked to them briefly and that they still didn't understand why they were wrong. They still thought the whole family was being unfair to them. So Caroline explained to them point by point why what they did was wrong, why abandoning me at the hospital was unforgivable, why blaming me for the accident was cruel, why lying to the family about everything was cowardly. According to Caroline, my mom started crying and said they had no choice because Rachel was giving birth and needed their support, that they couldn't be in 2 places at the same time. Caroline responded that they could have visited afterwards, that they could have called more than once, that they could have helped with the medical debts, that they had a million options and chose to ignore me completely. My dad got defensive and said I was exaggerating everything, that it hadn't been that serious, that I just wanted attention. That conversation with Caroline was weird, because for the first time in 3 years, someone from my family completely validated me. She told me I had every right to be angry, that what my parents did was horrible, that she understood why I'd cut off contact. We both ended up crying on the phone. I don't know how long we were there talking, but I felt like 3 years of repressed emotions came out all at once. I told her things I hadn't even told Sarah, like the times I'd thought about saying screw it all, how I'd considered legally changing my name so they could never find me, how I still had nightmares about the accident, where in my dreams I was alone and no one came to help me. A week ago, I received an email from my mom. Not a text message, not a call, a formal email like a letter. In the email it said they had reflected on what happened and that perhaps they should have gone to visit me at the hospital at least once. It said that at that moment they were very stressed with Maya's birth and that they didn't adequately process the severity of my situation. Basically, it was a non-apology disguised as an apology, like vaguely, acknowledging they did something wrong but justifying it with stress and circumstances. I didn't respond to that email. I showed it to Sarah, Marcus, and other friends, and they all agreed it was garbage, that it wasn't a real apology, that they still weren't taking full responsibility for what they did. The email ended saying they had decided not to proceed with legal action, meaning Rachel wasn't going to press charges, and that they hoped that with time we could heal as a family. I mentioned they had posted on Facebook that the family conflict had been resolved and that everything was fine now. Which was like, seriously? You think you can fix 3 years of abandonment and trauma with a lukewarm email and a social media post? The reality is, I don't know if I'll ever be able to forgive my parents. It's not even about the accident itself, because that wasn't their fault. It was Daniel Cooper's fault. The drunk driver who hit me, who, by the way, went to prison. But that's another story. It's about everything else. About the chain of active decisions they made to exclude me from their lives when I was most vulnerable, about blaming me, about lying to the family, about showing up 3 years later only because they got caught in their lies. Maya turned 3 and she'll probably never know me. She's going to grow up thinking she has an aunt who doesn't want to know anything about her, when the reality is, I was super excited to be an aunt before all this happened. That hurts me. I'm not going to lie. But I also can't force a relationship with my niece if that means having to pretend everything's okay with Rachel and my parents. Caroline told me several uncles and cousins want to reconnect with me now that they know the truth. Some have sent me messages asking how I am, saying they regret not having been there for me when the accident happened, that if they had known, things would have been different. I appreciate the gesture. Seriously. But it's also weird, because part of me thinks, where were you during these 3 years? But I guess it's not fair to blame them when my own parents lied to them about everything. I've been thinking a lot about what to do now. If I should give a chance to having a relationship with the rest of my family, even if that means seeing my parents at occasional events, or if it's better to keep my distance from everyone to not complicate my life. Sarah says I should do therapy, that I have a ton of unprocessed trauma from the accident and the abandonment, and she's probably right. Marcus says to do whatever makes me happiest, that I don't owe anything to anyone. The only thing I'm clear about is that I'm not going to respond to that email from my mom. I'm not going to give them the satisfaction of thinking a mediocre email fixes years of damage. I'm not going to pretend everything's okay so they feel better about themselves or so their social image improves. If they ever really want to fix things, they're going to have to do much more than send an email and a Facebook post. Last week, I went back to the gym where I trained martial arts before the accident. My instructor, whose name is Mike and has known me since I was 12, almost cried when he saw me. I explained everything that had happened, why I'd disappeared for so long, and he just hugged me and told me my place there had always been waiting for me. I started training again, gently because my body still has limitations, but it feels good to be back doing something I love. Yesterday, I was doing warm-up exercises when a kid like 5 years old approached me and asked why I had scars on my arm. His parents looked mortified, but I smiled at him and said, I had an accident a while ago, but I'm better now. The kid thought for a moment and then said, I'm glad you're better now, and ran off. It was a super simple moment, but it made me think about Maya, that she's probably never going to have those casual moments with me, and that still hurts. I guess at the end of the day, what bothers me most is that my parents had so many opportunities to do the right thing, and they chose the easy way every time. They chose to stay with Rachel instead of coming to the hospital. They chose to blame me instead of supporting me. They chose to lie to the family instead of admitting their mistake. They chose to threaten me with legal charges instead of genuinely apologizing. And now they're choosing to send a lukewarm email instead of doing the real work of repairing the relationship. I don't know what's going to happen in the future. Maybe with time I can have some kind of cordial relationship with them, like seeing each other at Christmas and acting civilly. Or maybe I'll never talk to them again, and that's okay too. What I do know is that I'm not going to let them make me feel guilty anymore for setting boundaries, for protecting my peace of mind, for choosing myself for the first time in my life. Caroline sent me a message this morning, saying my grandmother wants to see me. I still haven't decided if I'm going to go, because I know she'll probably try to convince me to forgive my parents. It's her style. But maybe I will go? I don't know. I miss my grandmother, and she was always good to me when I was a kid. I guess I can handle an uncomfortable conversation if it means reconnecting with people I actually care about. For now, I'm focused on my life, on my work, on getting back to training, on maintaining the friendships that saved me when my family abandoned me. Sarah is getting married next year and asked me to be her maid of honor, which made me cry because that's the family I chose. That's the people who were there when no one else was. And that's enough for now, I guess.